So again, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're joining us from the States, and welcome to today's NECE Campus session. It is a great pleasure to see so many of you joining us from across Europe and beyond. Just to get us started, I'll briefly introduce the topic and our speakers. So as you might know, this year marks the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in the United States. This anniversary is, of course, a great occasion to celebrate, but it also comes at a time of significant political polarization, declining trust, in society and institutions, and growing concerns about the future of democracy and democratic life in general. These developments raise some really important questions for us civic educators, both in Europe, in the States, and pretty much everywhere. So therefore, we decided to have a conversation to explore the state of civic education in the United States, the historical traditions that have shaped it, and the challenges educators are facing today. We will also reflect on what the American experience might tell us about civics, democratic culture, and public trust more broadly. I am very delighted to welcome our two speakers. Emma Humphries is Chief Education Officer at iCivics, one of the leading civic education organizations in the United States. Emma leads iCivics' research agenda and serves as a widely recognized expert on civics, history, and education. She has spent many years working on ensuring that civic education remains accurate, objective, nonpartisan, and accessible to learners across the country. Joining her in conversation is one of our co-founders, Louisa Slavkova, political scientist, civic educator, and also founder and co-director of the Sofia Platform Foundation. Emma and Louisa, thank you both for being with us today. With that, I would like to hand over to you, Emma, to tell us a bit about your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Yes, it is 9:04 a.m. here on the East Coast of the United States, but I can't think of a better way to start my day. So I am proud to be here representing iCivics. We were founded in 2009 by a woman named Sandra Day O'Connor. Justice O'Connor was the first female Supreme Court justice on our highest court, the Supreme Court. And importantly, she was viewed as sort of a centrist figure. So even though she was nominated by a very conservative Republican, President Reagan, a lot of her decisions she took with the liberal majority. And so in that way, she's widely beloved, both because she speaks across the aisle, and being the first female on our high court was a big deal. She's no longer with us, but we are very proud to have her mission, her feistiness, and her desire to preserve democracy in the United States for the next generation. Something she would say is, knowledge of democracy is not passed down through the gene pool. We must teach it to each generation anew. And so that's a big part of what we do. We make learning free, learning materials, video games, videos, lesson plans, full curricula, infographics. I mean, if you can think of a type of instructional media, we make it. Now, importantly, we realized a few years ago that you can make all the best materials in the world, but if students aren't learning civics, then they're not going to use them. The teachers aren't going to be able to deploy them. And so we started an advocacy organization called CIVICS Now, CIVX Now, which comprises over 400 organizations, civic organizations in the United States, working to advance civic education policy, both at the national level and at the state level. And I think we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but I think importantly, we have a very decentralized system in our country, a very federal system. Some things are assumed to be under the purview of the federal government. Education is not one of them. We have a long history of what is considered state and local control. And so if you want to change civic education policy in the United States, you have to change it in 50 states. It's a lot of work, but we have a great team who's made a lot of progress on that front.
Right, Emma, thank you. This is where I'm chipping in, and I'm going to have a much more modest role today, rather than messing up what you are going to share. I'm just here to come up with really smart questions. Not sure if I'll be able to do that, so just asking everyone to keep supporting me in this task. And if you have questions for Emma, please feel free to post those in the chat. So, Emma, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the important work that you are doing, both within your organization and the platform. Now, if we can maybe start a little bit with the historical context. So, why do we talk about the state of civic education against the background of the 250th anniversary of the Independence Declaration?
Yeah, so this is supposed to be just a magnificent celebratory year. The last time we had an event like this was in 1976, and I was not here for that. I missed it by about 6 or 7 years. From what I understand, that event was far more momentous, far more celebratory than the one we're having. Now you have to understand, I mean, this is our nation's origin story. This is our founding story. This is when we sort of broke free of the monarchical chains and set up our own democracy. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them to another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations which the laws of men and laws of nature, nature's God, entitle them a decent respect for the opinions of mankind, require that they should declare the causes which compel them to the separation. I promise I'm not going to quote the whole thing. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in order to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. If anyone knows anything about American history, they know that the moment that was being written, that wasn't true. And decades into our nation's story, that wasn't true. All men, in terms of our government, were not created equal. Yes, by God they were, but not by the way our government treated them. So it's always been this path, this story. This one of my favorite things. One of my favorite lines actually comes from the preamble to the Constitution, not the Declaration. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, a more perfect union. So we knew from the start that we weren't there. We had a long way to go. But this moment where we break free, we form our own country, that's everything. It is our shared inheritance as Americans. Doesn't matter who you are, who you vote for. That is your story. That is our story to tell. And it's a story that civic educators love to tell. It's our favorite story to tell. Yet here we are in this semi-quincentennial, this big 250th anniversary, and not everyone's feeling really celebratory. I do want to say there's something about summer and something about the World Cup that is creating a more celebratory vibe in this exact moment. But we've been trying to get people excited about this for a year and have pretty much come up short. So delighted for the summer vibes, delighted for the World Cup here in the United States, and the fact that the men's team is doing so well in the moment. But still, it's almost as if the divisions that marked our country's story in 1850s and 60s and beyond are still very much alive today. And we have so much work to do.
So can you maybe then speak of these divisions? Because you mentioned
Yeah.
the 200th anniversary, and if I'm not mistaken, this is right after the Vietnam War. So I cannot imagine that the United States has been, that there has been no division or no polarization in society, also straight after the Watergate scandal.
Yeah.
So how is now different from 50 years ago?
That's such a great question. And it's such an important reminder for our students to say, like, yes, things have been bad before. This isn't the first time. May we remind you of our Civil War, the deadliest war in American history where Americans were killing Americans. Yeah, and then the Vietnam War, what a disaster that was, and what damage it did to our country's reputation, to our sense of confidence in our institutions, but it still is nothing like what we're experiencing today. And I think the biggest difference is in 1970, I keep wanting to say 1776, so that's what's on the brain. 1976, things were rough, but we weren't divided in the way we're divided now as a people. We lived in the same reality, we consumed the same news, and we, for the most part, could say that's right and that's wrong, and we could agree on those things. And that's just not the case anymore. We truly live in different realities based on our media habits, our algorithms, our TV news consumption in particular, and the trust we have in each other, the trust we have in our institutions is at one of its lowest points, if not lowest. The fact that in 1976, if I were to bring home a young man and say, "Mom and Dad, this is my fiance," they wouldn't wonder, "Gee, I hope he's a member of our political party." Where today, the majority of voters would be upset if their child married a member of a different political party. That is awful. We have so much work to do. But to me, that's what the difference is. In 1976, we still viewed each other as fellow Americans. And now we sort of look and say, I wonder if they're on my team. And by that, I mean my political party.
So this made me think of the great book Bowling Alone.
Yes.
So
Robert Putnam.
Exactly. Bob Putnam, for those of you who do not know who he is, he's an American political scientist who wrote the book Bowling Alone. It's probably now 20 years ago. And in the book, he described the patterns of alienation in American society. I mean, Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to give a better description of what the book is all about. But he says in the book that the less and less we have something to do with each other, and the more and more we lack those platforms of shared information, like the television, we lack a common story. And there is a fascinating documentary that's based on his life that's called Join or Die, that basically tries to show everyone that if that we as humans are doomed to cooperate, or we're lucky to cooperate, and hence if we're joining different clubs that help us bridge our divides, we're better off, and our institutions are going to be better off, our health is going to be better off, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think if I get right, what you're saying is that the difference in the last 50 years is that has been that we no longer have that amount of those shared civic spaces where we could form shared opinions, shared identity, and shared aspirations.
That's absolutely right. And you know what's wild to think about, Louisa, is that Bob Putnam wrote that book before the internet was such a daily staple in our lives. He was worried about television. Think about how far we have fallen since then, how worse it has gotten. But he was absolutely onto something. And he was ahead of his time in noticing this. And so for the historians in the room, especially those who know a bit about American history, I'm sure all of you know about Alexis de Tocqueville, his famous tome, Democracy in America. And he talks a lot about this American tradition. I pulled up the quote because this is not one I know by heart. Americans of all ages, all conditions, all minds constantly unite. Not only do they have commercial and industrial associations in which all take part, but they also have 1,000 other kinds: religious, moral, grave, feudal, very general, very particular, immense, and very small. That is 100% true. It is not true anymore. A very personal example I can give is a couple of years ago when my grandfather passed away. I was sort of going through just files and papers and personal belongings, and I found so many different membership cards industrial, religious. He was a plumber. He was a member of the Plumbers Union. He was a member of the International Society of Plumbing and Air Conditioning and Heating Contractors. He was a member of his church. His wife was a member of Rotary. I could go on and on and on. And that is very rare. It's not completely gone, but it's very rare today. And so we're not we're not all watching Walter Cronkite. That's the famous example everyone uses in the States. He was he was the guy, the media guy that every night at 5 or 6 o'clock, whenever people sat down to watch the evening news, they sat down to watch Walter Cronkite. So it didn't matter if you were in California or New York City or anywhere in between, you heard news from Walter Cronkite and you believed it. And then you would go to your bowling league or you would go to your Rotary Club meeting or your Elks Club. We have really weird things here. And you would talk to people and you would talk about the news that you all heard, which was the exact same news. That is not the world in which we live in. I live in a place that has really strong civic health. And by that, I mean this little island I live on in Southeast Georgia in the United States has a lot of civic association. A lot of people belong to different groups here. That is unique. It's also why I think it's a happier place to live than other places in the country. I'm not sure that I answered your question. I just got really excited about Bowling Alone and Alexis de Tocqueville and my examples of that. But it is indicative of the decline. And, it didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. And something else that didn't happen overnight, Louisa, is we slowly but surely stopped prioritizing civic education in this country. So during a trajectory in which we needed it more and more, we were teaching it less and less. So it's no wonder we are sort of where we are today.
I like the fact that you quoted Alexis de Tocqueville because I think so very often in Europe, when we think about the United States or when we thought of the United States, at least until a couple of years ago, is that you have this great ability of self-organizing and self-governance. And I think pulling in the conversation Tocqueville helps us also realize that the American state was founded following a different logic compared to European states. Very often, European states followed the tradition of we need to fight a war, and hence we need to organize to be able to fight that war. This was not the case in the United States. And hence, the focus has been put also on different institutions. Postal offices had a great role to play in the emerging American state because elections were important. Organizing the military and other institutions in Europe mattered a lot because this was important for the states. And so this greater level of self-governance meant that you had, I think you call it a small state, but there was a big role for citizens to play. So
Right.
wanting or not, American citizens had to have this level of organizing, collaborating, and so I just thought highlighting this for the sake of understanding is also important. You said that the decline did not happen overnight, and I'm also sure that it's not only social media and the 24-hour television cycle to blame. Who else is to blame for the decline?
We all are. And and I don't say that to be cheeky or to say, play both sides here. It is truly a failure that transcends political party, that transcends administrations. The history that I like to tell around this starts with the launching of the Russian satellite Sputnik, which was a visual and very scary, again, wasn't there for it, display of our enemy beating us in this space race and and you could stand in your front yard in the United States of America and see this satellite whirl overhead, this magnificent scientific marvel of your enemy fly overhead. You can imagine that freaked everyone out. And one of the responses to that is for the first time, the federal government, the national government of the United States took an interest in education for the sake of national security. And at that time, we started greatly emphasizing science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Now, there are only so many hours in the school day and only so many school days in the year. So if you're going to emphasize something, then something else is going to have to take a back seat. Now, this didn't happen overnight. This, again, so if you were a kid in the 1950s in America, you were taking some sort of civics or history class every year. In order to graduate high school, before going off to college or the workforce, you had to take at least 3 courses. Today, that number is 1, and it's not even a full year. Most states only require a half of year of civics in the very last year of formal public education. So we spend 13 years from kindergarten, what we call kindergarten, to 12th grade, preparing kids to read, write, be workers, do math, all that. We spend 1/2 of a year last year saying, okay, you got to be a citizen. That is not how it started. That is not our nation's story. I mean, we're probably unique in that our founding fathers talked about education. They knew how important it was. Thomas Jefferson, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, expects what never was and never will be. Washington promote then as the primary object of primary importance institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge. Right? This is so baked in, and it was such a huge part of our public education, all education, up until let's say late 1950s, 60s, and then the general decline started. We have something called the National Defense of Education Act that came out shortly after Sputnik. That's the first time the federal government wrote education policy. Fast forward a decade or so, you have what's called a nation at risk, rising tide of mediocrity. That freaked us out again. And so we started focusing on reading. Again, you're emphasizing another subject. Where are you going to pull that time from? Social studies, history, civics. The George W. Bush administration, No Child Left Behind, followed by the Barack Obama administration, Race to the Top. All of these major federal education packages, they weren't trying to destroy civic education, but they were. It was an unintended consequence. While promoting science and then promoting math and then promoting reading, less and less time. And then today I can tell you, I have school-age children. They have math every day. They have reading every day. They have science or social studies every other day, half the time. And what they do have is probably 45 minutes, if that, in a 7-8 hour day. So the amount of instruction we provide is woeful. It's woefully inadequate. The dollars we invest in this, the dollars we invest in teacher training, woefully inadequate. And then worst of all, it is the hardest subject to teach, because if you're a civics teacher, you're afraid to do your job. You're afraid you're going to say the wrong thing, and a kid is recording you, or a kid's going to tell their parents. And the next thing you know, there's a lynch mob coming after you because you must be some progressive indoctrinator, or you conservative MAGA Republican, right? And I know I'm sounding like I'm being dramatic, but these forces are at play. And even when they're not, even when a teacher is in a community where those things don't happen, she's still afraid that they're going to happen. I have teachers who tell me that they've been diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, something that you associate with combat. Teachers feel that from every day being like, how do you teach about the Civil War? How do you teach about civil rights, due process, rule of law, without talking about these things, without talking about these issues and being real with students? And the teachers are afraid to do it. And even when they live in a place, I have a friend who teaches in Boston, very blue, progressive, liberal community, all his students, all of their families. He has nothing to worry about, yet he is every day afraid that that phone's going to ring and it's going to be the day that he gets in trouble for just slipping up just a little bit.
I honestly don't think that this sounds dramatic even to European ears, because this is something that many teachers of civics in Europe can associate with.
I'm sorry to hear that. I always love solidarity. There's comfort in knowing that you're not alone in this, but we can't have that, right? Europe cannot have that. The United States cannot have that. Our form of government requires that we teach these topics, that we teach them honestly and accurately and courageously and comprehensively. And more we're afraid to do precisely that.
So in order to reprioritize civic education in schools, and I think in a moment we're also going to start talking about civic education outside of schools, what do we ought to do? Prove that this is civic education is a matter of national security?
So we actually had at one point a secretary of national security talk about that very thing and write an op-ed. We've had General Mattis at some of our conferences. It is absolutely a matter of national security. It is a matter of economic health. It is a matter of just overall mental well-being. It's all of those things. I will say there was a point about 5 years ago where the United States Department of Defense put out a civic education grant. My organization, iCivics, actually received funding to teach students in what are called DoDEA schools, Department of Defense Education somethings, to teach civics because, think about it this way. If you expect someone to sign up to serve their country, to be willing to die for their country, they need to know what they're fighting for. If you don't teach them our history, if you don't teach them our civics, and that's just one very small literal example. But why would you die for something that you don't believe in? Why would you be willing to risk your life for something you don't believe in? And I can tell you that more and more young people in America do not believe in democracy.
So when you advocate within the network, the Civics Now network, when you advocate vis-a-vis institutions for more or better civic education, what do you advocate for? How do you build your argument, and what kind of content of civic education are you looking at? Because the eternal discussion between institutions. Do we focus civic education just on teaching institutions, or do we focus civic education on teaching, as you just said, it's about your financial literacy, it's about your economic literacy, it's about your mental health, it's about algorithmic literacy. So there is, over time, civics is not just about institutions, but it's also about your understanding of historical context. So it's like a never-ending tree with a lot of branches.
Yeah, that's right. So the good news is that Americans across the political spectrum agree that civic education is important. We have widespread bipartisan agreement, and those percentages keep going up year over year. And more, every time I tell someone what I do for a living, their response is, "That is so important. Thank you, thank you." Now, the problem is we agree that we need this. Well, what should it look like? What should it emphasize? How should it tell our nation's story? How should it encourage students to be engaged as citizens, right? That's where the agreement starts to fall apart. There's also even disagreement in how we teach it, where one side thinks we should teach it more as a known set of facts and promote knowledge, where another side would say we need to teach the skills and help students get involved in solving real world problems. And all of these things become little culture war battles in this larger culture war. Now, to your question of sort of what does that mean? What are we encouraging states to do? So I put in our Civics Now website. And if you go to, actually, let me just sort of walk us through here. If you go to advancing policy, you'll see we have two big tabs at the national level and then in the states. And then if you click on in the states, what you'll see is a map of the United States where you can click on every state. I'm going to click on the state of Florida because everyone knows about Florida and it's also where I'm from. And you can say a lot of really interesting things about Florida and Florida man and all of that. But Florida actually does civic education well. And the reason is that the founder of iCivics, Sandra Day O'Connor, went down to Florida, went to our state legislature years ago. And by years ago, I mean, not quite 20 years ago. And she just tore into these legislators and she said, "What is the matter with you? You're not teaching civics. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves." And then this very divided state legislature, and what at the time was a very purple, politically diverse state, voted unanimously to pass the Justice Sandra Day Civic Education Act. And what that means is that Florida teaches civics. We are one of the only states in the union to teach a full year, and mind you, this is not a lot, but a full year of civics in middle school. So that's the first thing we want states to do. We want, if you don't have a middle school, a standalone, separate civics course in middle school, you need to have one. Better yet, you should test it. Because if you're testing math and science and reading, but you're not testing civics or social studies, all you're telling students is that it's not important. And all you're telling districts is don't put your money in that, don't invest in that, because that doesn't matter. What matters is that your kids can read and write and do science, right? So we want them to teach it, we want them to test it, we want them to include media or information literacy in their learning standards. We want them to provide funding specifically for civic education. We want them to provide teacher professional development in civics. We want them to also have a standalone high school course. Most states do. Most states do have that standalone high school course. In short, we want them to emphasize it. We're not going to tell them what to teach or how to teach it. We're just saying you need to have these courses, you need to invest in these courses, you need to make these courses important. And then at the state level, you decide what your standards are, you decide what to emphasize and how to teach it.
Right. And so, and what is the role of non-formal and informal civic education? So the type of civic education that is happening either outside of school, but still working closely with young people and with teachers, or the civic education that is sort of unintended. So how does that fit into the whole ecosystem?
So we have absolutely pulled all of those groups and programs into our coalition. If you look at the list of Civics Now partner organizations, you will see those types of after school, summer program. You know, civic education doesn't only have to happen in a classroom, it can happen in all these other places. Now, as you all know, in the United States, we don't have the most family-friendly policies in terms of working families. So a lot of this comes through what is daycare, what is after school care, right? Like making sure the kids are supervised in these after school programs. That's about keeping them safe and it's about helping them academically. So how do we encourage these groups to make civics a huge priority of that educational experience after the school day? I won't claim to be an expert in the informal spaces. A lot of my research and focus is what happens in schools. But I think what happens outside of schools is tremendously important. And whether it is civic or religious or after school, for profit, don't care. If you're emphasizing the role of a young person in our democracy, I think it's really important. And on the point about religious, I want to say I do believe that you can have very strong pluralistic civic education emphasized in any type of school, including private schools, including charter schools, and even people who educate their children at home, what we call homeschooling. Civic education can and should happen in all those spaces. And our work is to help make that so.
Yeah, so interestingly in Europe, the non-formal civic education space is, I think, in some countries even more prominent in doing more work than the actual formal civic education. And one of the reasons for that is not just the fact that the subject is not prominent or is not tested, as you said, but also because teaching civics at schools becomes at times too detached from reality. So
Correct.
it seems like a heavily theoretical and philosophical subject that doesn't have much with what's happening in the real world. At the same time, I also know from our work with teachers that they find it extremely difficult to keep up with all the things that are happening across the world because they all come together in the mobile device of a young person. And some YouTuber or influencer is much faster in explaining in 60 seconds what the war in Iran is all about. Whereas a teacher, for the before mentioned reasons, first of all, would not feel comfortable discussing all of this so that they do not get into a difficult position. But also because they would not feel comfortable discussing something where they might lack the whole context of the war. And I mean, U.S.-Iranian relationships are, there is a lot of history to that. But if you were let's say a civics teacher in a small European country that doesn't necessarily follow that, that's becoming even more difficult. So what do you think? Is this something? Is this a challenge that also teachers in the United States say that not only is it difficult to teach topics because they are very quickly, very, very polarizing, but also because the complexity is just overwhelming to them. So all of a sudden they need to become experts in pretty much any topic out there.
That's right. That is absolutely a problem here for a number of reasons. For one is that the sort of traditional path to becoming a teacher has really changed in the United States. And what we have are a lot of second career people who they have a bachelor's degree, they have their college degree, they get their teaching certificate, but they're not subject matter experts. They were not a political science person like you, like I. My undergrad's in political science, my graduate degree is in history and education. I would go into the classroom with this lot of confidence in my background knowledge, but still would have to do a lot of work to keep on top of it, to understand it. Imagine not having that strong foundation in this. You're not going to feel that like you have the ability to lead a classroom activity or discussion around this current niche, polarizing, fraught topic. And I wouldn't blame you as an educator. So that's a big part of the challenge here. And then we're not investing in the subject matter expertise of those educators. And here's the biggest problem from my perspective. Any kid in any classroom, every teacher has heard this question: why do we have to learn this? Like when you're in calculus, going, oh my goodness, maybe your friend next to you might, want to be an engineer, but you want to be a politician or a teacher. You're going, why do I have to know how to do this, right? Any classroom, you're going to have kids ask that. So in a civics class, like, why should they care? Why should they care that it's the 250th anniversary of our nation? Why should they care if they know how to vote or if rule of law is being properly attended to in our country? And I think that's what we get wrong. I don't know if this is true in Europe, but the way we teach civics in the United States is we just go right into it, right into the Constitution and the branches and checks and balances and all we teach them all this stuff. And they're sitting there going like, this is so boring. This is so dry. I mean, at least history is a story, right? Civics is abstract. It's dry. They have no frame of reference for it. There's no relevancy to them. And then if there's time at the end of we teach them all this stuff. And then at the end of the semester, the end of the year, if there's time, we say, okay, kids, we're going to do a project. What do you care about? And the kids are going, I don't know. And I've seen this. So I one summer I went to two different high schools. I went to a high school in Texas. It was a big, comprehensive high school. We're talking like 5,000 kids on this campus. And then I went to a small charter school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where they have a really strong civic ethos. So I'm in Texas first, and I'm talking to seniors in high school. Most of them are already 18 or will soon turn 18. They're eligible to vote, although only one of them had registered. And I said, well, what do you guys care about? They had no idea how to answer the question. I really had to prompt them. And finally, I said, there's no wrong answers. What do you care about? And this young woman says, my sneaker collection. And I said, those are awesome sneakers. I'm proud of you. What else, right? And I'm prompting. Well, it turns out that the kids in this school district have to use clear backpacks. You can guess why they have to use clear backpacks in the school. We don't have to go into that sad facet of American society. And I said, tell me about those backpacks. You love those backpacks, don't you? All your stuff on display. We hate those backpacks, miss. We hate them. Okay, so you care about that. If you want to change that, what do you have to do? They had no idea. You guys get the point. No one ever asked them what they cared about. No one ever explained to them how these issues are affected to local government, the school board or the state, whatever the policy is. Then I go to Pittsburgh and I'm in this small, again, this charter school that has a very strong civic ethos. They start the first year of school by asking students, before they even start teaching math, what do you care about? What are the issues that matter to you? So when I sat down with those kids and said, what do you care about? I mean, the hands just started flying up and they were giving me policy statements. And the difference is that civic ethos and that prioritization for a school to say, this matters, we're going to focus on it, versus the school that just dives into reading, writing, arithmetic, and the kids have no sense of it. So I guess in short, we're doing it wrong and we're doing it backwards. Don't dive right into the content. Talk about what the kids care about. Ask them what they care about. Help them see why they should care. And then give them the knowledge and the skills to do something about those things they care about.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I feel like the only way to do that is not necessarily through the curricula, but through actually working with teachers and supporting them to
Correct.
understand that that's the only way to anchor the subject. Because I mean, with all the great advocacy work that you are doing or others are doing, we would never, I cannot imagine a near future where a curricula are going to be so flexible to allow those open questions to begin with. Whereas I think teachers can be supported and encouraged to anchor the subject in the beginning in such a way so that young people can find themselves into the subject. Because I think it's you carry that same lack of imagination, even how to turn your the things you care about into civic causes that can rally support from others.
Right.
Emma, I'd like to turn to some of the questions in the chat
Yes,
if
I would
if
love that.
for you. So there is a question from a colleague who is American herself, former teacher from Virginia, and she's asking, or she's rather concerned about the America 250 Civics Coalition and how that might impact curricula throughout the United States. Is this something you have it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I can speak directly to. So it's been an interesting year with America, this whole America 250 and semi-quincentennial, and there's sort of the formal uh, there's the commission from Congress, and there's sort of the White House initiative, and then there's just everything everyone else is doing. Um, so there is this sort of the one officially coming from the White House is absolutely an ideological, sort of more partisan effort. You can look down the list of associations, and you won't see any progressive or left of center organizations. You'll see Heritage, Moms for Liberty, Turning Point Education. Um, Now, the argument. So I actually asked a member of the U.S. Department of Education about that. So this is an administration, a political appointee. I said, "Tell me about this," and she said, "Well, if the Biden administration was in power, or some Democratic administration were in power, they would have done the same thing." She's not entirely wrong. We do, when it comes to sort of efforts coming from the White House, they're going to drive their agendas, their value system. But there are these other efforts happening that aren't associated with that. And I guess what I would say is multiple things can be true at once. You can have these multiple organizations representing sort of different facets of American society. I wish we could all just be one big, happy, rah rah America 250, but that's not the case. But here's something else that's really interesting. I sat down with, I'm not going to name any names, of course, but I sat down with some United States Department of Education officials, again, political appointees. These aren't bureaucrats, these are Trump administration appointees. And I sat down with some teachers, social studies, civics teachers, who consider themselves more conservative. They would be Trump voters. And I asked them a whole bunch of questions about civics and history and what we should teach and how. And I would say that we agreed on 99% of everything. And if I had, now I'm not a partisan actor, but if I had a left of center partisan, a Democrat next to me, they probably would have said the same thing. We really mostly agree. The rhetoric is very divisive. What we see on the news is very, very divisive. But when you get down to it, the definition that the administration has put out for patriotic education, I'm okay with it. It's not how I would have worded it, but there's nothing in there that I say, oh, absolutely not. That is indoctrination. That is inaccurate. Again, they're using different words. There's that focus on patriotism. In our organization, we use the term reflective patriotism, which is sort of like you can love your country and also know the good, the bad, everything in between. You could want to bring her towards her more perfect union. You don't have to believe that America is perfect to be a true patriot. And my friends across the political spectrum agree. Now, one thing that was interesting is that one of the people in that little group I was talking to is a state senator from a very red Republican state in the United States. And he started politely, diplomatically yelling at the administration official, saying, So you're saying we Republicans are just as bad as the Democrats? We're just going to do what they did? We criticize them for doing that. Why are we doing that? And I thought, wow, what a powerful moment. We need more Democrats and Republicans thinking like that, saying enough of this game, enough of this, well, it's our turn now, we're in power. And then the pendulum swings. It's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting to live in a country where you think, and I know we're not the only ones, right? But all right, this guy won, so we're way over here out on the left. Oh, now the right one, now we're way over here. Like, can we just sort of meet in the middle? Because the middle is where the American people are. The majority, if you sit down and you poll Americans, we are, so to use a American football metaphor, we used to play politics within 10 yards of the 50-yard line, right? We were all in the middle. And our views are pretty much still there, but our political parties are in the end zones. And what happens is we think our fellow Americans are also in the end zones when the data says no. The data says, I have next door neighbors. We are on very different sort of sides of the political aisle. We talk about things a lot. When we actually sit and talk, we agree on so much, but our system of government, our political parties, our media landscape just pushes us out and makes us distrustful of one another. Sorry, that was a really long answer, and I went off the rails there. I'm always concerned. I'm always asking questions. I'm always saying like, "Ooh, what's going on here?" But I think the reality on the ground in the States right now is that the civic education most kids are getting is when they're getting it is pretty banal, pretty nonpartisan.
Right. So there is another question on what do you think young people don't believe in democracy anymore? I mean, I don't know the exact numbers for the United States,
It's so bad.
but so I'm guessing, um, yeah, you might
They're
know.
really low. They're really, really low. I don't know the exact, but I can give you a stat that is even worse than just so we knew that trust in democracy was declining. A year ago, the America's Promise Alliance, a nonpartisan sort of convener here in the States, did a report called The State of Young People. So they had a nationally representative sample of, I think it was, let me look at my numbers here, 13 to 24-year-olds, 13 years old to 24 years old. And what they found is that approximately 7 in 10 young people feel that the nation is more divided than ever. And this is where it gets really bad. Just 1 in 4, just 23% trust the adults in their own community. And I had to read that about 7 times because it's one thing to not trust Congress or Washington, D.C. or politicians, but to not trust the adults in your own community, only 23% of Americans between the ages of 13 and 24 trust the adults in their own community. So this trust is really bad and really pervasive and not just limited to our democracy or our institutions. Now, why is that the case? There's a number of reasons. I believe, and this is not the research that I do, but I read the people who do this research, the political scientists, and I think there's a few factors in play. One is that they weren't taught, right? Like if all you know about American democracy is what you see on cable news, why would you think it's a good thing? I mean, I turn on the news and I watch it for 5 minutes. And I'm just like, enough. This is ridiculous. It's so broken. It's so toxic. So there's that. And if that's all you know, if you didn't learn about World War I or World War II, if you don't know what the alternative is, then you might think, well, democracy sucks. Let's try something new. Yeah, well, we've all tried that before. It doesn't work out well. But they don't know that because we haven't taught it. So they don't have the comparison point. They don't have the history. And then what they see is so broken.
I mean, as a historian, I love I mean, as a I'm minored in history, so I love the comparison. At the same time, what I observe amongst young people is that they're actually more afraid of the future than they're afraid of the past. So if they know about the
That's
past,
right.
you're more afraid of the future. We're in a
Correct.
conundrum there.
And that fear of the future is existential. Now, I think if I lived in Paris in I don't know, 1945, I would think that it was an existential threat as well. but they're talking about like a global existential threat, right? They're worried about their entire world, not just the world order. So I think that's a big part of it. I don't, and I'm not, you're not saying this, but I hear this a lot out there that, kids don't care, they don't care. I don't think that's true. I actually think they care a lot. They just care about different things. And their direction is forward, where for a lot of us, especially those more advanced in age, their gaze is backwards. And so they're viewing everything in this different lens, focused in this different direction. And they're seeing a system of government that doesn't seem so concerned with all the stuff they see out in the future as their biggest threats. Yeah, I don't. How do you tell a 19-year-old in the United States to care more about the rise of fascism than climate change? Like and even though we know that's not just a historical phenomenon in their minds and the way we teach it, if we do, that's in the past. They're looking ahead and saying, we're screwed. And that narrative gets worse every day. The rise of AI and the threat that they feel it has on their entire economic and financial viability, it keeps compounding. And the adults in the room, it seems to these young people, don't care at all about any of these things. Mm. So you can't blame them, right? I mean, when I look at those numbers, I'm like, that's our fault. That is, I wouldn't, if I was a teenager in America today, I wouldn't trust these institutions.
I'll ask you at the very end, what is it that we're supposed to do different? So we have a different conversation at the next anniversary campus event. But I'll get to that. So I have two more questions for you. One is from Ada from Albania, who is asking how the current protests in the country can basically be turned into a teachable moment by civic educators.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So, what's so scary is that not scary, but sad is when those teachable moments aren't happening because the teachers are afraid to do it. So what's really interesting about that same study that I quoted, about young people. So 9 in 10 young people believe that everyone should have access to civic education. 91% of American young people believe that everyone should have access to civic education. However, just 43% feel that they're even somewhat prepared for their roles as citizens. So in this moment, what is really wild is that kids actually want to learn. They want to know about civics. They want to talk about these current events. Teachers tell me all the time, the kids are more interested now than they've been in a really long time. They come in, they want to talk about what they saw in Minneapolis. They want to talk about what happened in Venezuela and what's happening in Iran. And the teachers are like, we don't want to teach that.
That's the thing. How do you do this in a non-partisan way? Is that even possible?
It's absolutely possible. And it's the theme of my entire campaign at iCivics this year, where I focused all my energy was on a campaign called We Can Teach Hard Things. The point being that civics has always been hard to teach. Yes, it's extra hard right now, but it's always been hard, but we know how to do this, and there are ways to do it. One way to do it is to focus on the historical. If you're not comfortable talking about what was happening in Minneapolis, talk about what happened in Boston. Violent and Boston Tea Party, by the way, is what, sorry, I didn't finish that thought. Violence has always been a part of our narrative, and Americans showing their disgust and their mistrust with violence has always been a part of our story. You can talk about that. You don't have, and let the kids go, hey, let the kids draw those conclusions, right? Another way I encourage teachers to teach it is to not focus on the person. Don't make it about Trump or Biden. Make it about the presidency. Ask the question, should the president be able to do this? Because you might hate the president one day, but you might love the president the day next, and vice versa. Do you think a president should have this power? What are some other things? Primary sources are a great way to focus. No one's going to get mad at you in America for letting your student read Washington's farewell address or letter from a Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King. Lean into those primary sources. And then at the end of the day, you don't have to answer the kid's questions. If a kid says, hey, miss, I saw something on the news yesterday, and that sure doesn't sound like rule of law. I'll go, interesting, say more. Tell me, what did you see? How does that contradict something that you've learned? Can you provide some sources? So there are ways to do it, but it takes confidence, it takes training, it takes patience. And it takes courage, unfortunately.
Right. I'm sure that after the end of the session, you will share some links with us that we can maybe put together
Absolutely.
in the recap that we're sending to all the participants, because I think this is going to be helpful. So I
You
have one
bet.
question from Mark, and then I'll ask you my final question, how we have a different conversation in 50
Yeah.
years, in 50 years from now. I think what Mark is, if I can summarize the question, I think what he's asking is, what kind of civic education do we need that helps people move, move away from a kind of or tribal instincts, and learn to deal with complexity, with difference,
Yeah.
and this interdependence.
I love the question. Thank you, Mark. I've always said that civics classrooms are laboratories for democracy. So the way you learn to do science by dissecting a arthropod or whatever, I'm not a science person, in your biology lab, you learn how to be a citizen and do civics in your civics class. So providing opportunities for students to talk about issues that they care about, that are current, that are important in a structured way. I heard from a teacher a few weeks ago. She talked about how she teaches online, 100% online, and her kids are all over the country. And she's taught her kids to do this every time someone says something that you go, the kids all start throwing up their hands saying, I want to see three sources. Like, cite that, show the evidence. So she's teaching kids to use evidence, to do evidence-based reasoning, critical thinking, and she's letting them have these conversations. I think that's what needs to happen more than anything. Let the kids talk about the issues. Don't allow them to yell at each other. Don't allow it to go off the rails. And you have to be intentional and structured, but opportunities to engage across difference, to have civil discourse, and to cultivate civic friendship is the answer. Yes, I want kids to be able to, tell me about the seven articles in the U.S. Constitution and the three branches of government. But I actually care a whole lot more if they know how to talk to one another.
Great. So is this your message for what civic educators should be doing differently or more in the next in the years?
I'm less concerned about what civic educators do and more concerned with what we, the people, and that's whether in the United States or in Europe or in Great Britain or anywhere else in this beautiful universe, we have to support this. We have to support educators. What I am seeing, we are in a moment, and I don't know how it's going to end. I can tell you that 85% of Democrats in America right now believe our democracy is in danger of failing. Um, I don't want that to be true, and I don't think it's going to be true. I think we will survive it. And the way we will build our way out of it, and it will take a long time. We didn't get here overnight. We are not going to get out of this overnight, but to prioritize civic education, to prioritize engaging across difference, and to set the example for our kids. Stop shouting at each other, stop living in echo chambers, and just go out into the world, join a club, talk to your fellow Americans. That's what will save our democracy, not anything in a textbook or in a video game that iCivics creates.
Thank you. I love the message of joining a club, obviously for you, for fellow Americans, but also for all of us here in Europe. Emma, this has been a great conversation.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed a lot. I hope this was an enjoyable and pleasant conversation for everyone who joined the campus session. I'm handing over back to Cami for a few announcements. And I think in a couple of days from now, we will send a short recap to everyone with useful links from your work and from the context you described in the United States for further reference. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much.